So let's kick off political geography, a divided world, looking at region. The first theme for this week to understand political geography and states in particular. Particular political geography we can think of as the geographic study of politics and political matters, or an array of both formal and functional political regions exist. Most important and influential is the state. And here we can begin to think of politics not just as Democrats or Republicans, but more of the circulation of power, power being the unequal, uneven distribution of rights and resources. And state here taking on a different meaning than we think of within the context of United States, more in the notion of a country, nation state, or a centralized authority that enforces a single political, economic, legal system within its territorial boundaries. As we see here, often used synonymously with country. Earth is divided into roughly 200 independent countries, or states, as it's known in political geography, political science. Here we have the map of those over 200 states. In the 20th century, the map was in rapid flux, proliferation of new countries. Most recent, newest country to be created was South Sudan just a few years ago in Africa. And here we take this to the next level in terms of sovereignty and territoriality. Modern international system, states recognized each other's sovereignty. This is the right of individual states to control political and economic affairs within their territorial boundaries without external influence. So one country having autonomy from the other country. And then, though, we begin to look at the layer of territoriality, this learned cultural response, which is rooted in European history, arguably, that produced external bounding and internal territorial organization characteristics, particularly of modern states. So controlling your land in the simplest form. Nationalism stems from that, the sense of belonging to and self-identifying with a national culture. This springs from a learned or acquired attachment to region and place. Late 18th century, the nation state was proposed as the ideal political geographical unit. Again here, nation state is used synonymously with nation or state or country. Geographic boundaries of a nation, its people and its culture would be identical to the territorial boundaries of a state under this late 18th century proposal for the nation state. More people have common culturally, the more stable and potent is the resultant nationalism. Examples such as Germany, Sweden, Japan, Greece, very strong national culture within those countries. Here's a map of nation states, multinational countries, and other types. So we see the North America here, north of the Rio Grande anyway, immigrant states, still multi-ethnic, but evolving towards nation statehood. Modern boundaries, we can look at such forms such as natural, ethnographic, geometric, and relic. Most modern boundaries are lines rather than zones. We can distinguish several types through looking at these. Here's a great example of how a boundary disappears in Berlin when the wall came down in 1989, singling a huge shift in the geopolitics and political economy of Eastern, meaning Western Europe. European Union being a great demonstration of this, the most powerful, ambitious, and successful supranational or above national organization. It has a present membership of 28 countries. Of course, as we've heard, now Great Britain in flux, opting to leave via the Brexit, but we'll see what will happen with that. Member countries have all sacrificed some sovereign powers to the EU administration. This is quite upsetting to a lot of people, especially with the austerity packages rolled out, such as in Greece. The euro as a monetary system has been adopted by most of the EU members. So that'd be those within the Eurozone we hear about. Most international borders within the EU are now open, requiring no passport checks. This allows for a vast amount of mobility of people and goods and services as well. So on the mobility note here, take a look at this theme, particularly diffusion and political innovation. And the consequences of colonialism was the creation of new patterns of mobility among conquered populations. So colonial rule, for example, in Africa, depending on a small cadre of educated African civil servants being sent to universities in Europe where they absorbed the ideals of Western political philosophy, their right of self-determination, for example. How then these educated Africans returned and organized new nationalist movements to oppose colonial rule. Interesting backlash there of colonialism, but here you see is this diffusion of freedom from colonialism spanning out in different color codings here corresponding to the years. And we can begin to wonder, as the question asked at the bottom of the screen, why do you think it took a few countries so much longer to gain independence? Now with some of our geographic tools and critical thinking, we can discuss that further in the discussion box down below. Mobility, diffusion, political innovation. Political innovations also spread within independent countries, such as the spread of suffrage for women. Federal statutes permit, to some degree, laws to be adopted in individual functional subdivisions. This results in often a patchwork legal pattern that reveals processes of cultural diffusion at work, such as the clean air movement across the US in particular. But here with the diffusion of suffrage of women in the US, an equal rights amendment being juxtaposed on there, see some pretty strong regional correlations, similarities between resistance to the Equal Rights Act and the amount of time taking for suffrage to be rolled out. Quite a multi-layered map here, give you some time to pause and really understand the key in what's being presented. Different red outline states and current figures as well, at least as of more recent 1975 through 1997 with proportions of female legislators, pretty interesting to understand and to contemplate. Globalization and the nation state. As globalization has evolved, one of the most profound effects has been the division of the entire globe into these nation states. And scholars generally trace that back to Europe, as we talked about a little bit earlier. But when the UN was created in 1945, it incorporated the principle of national self-determination into its charter, so the largest international governing body. This principle was adopted by independence movements in European colonies and around the globe. Ultimately led to decolonization. An important part of this is ethnic separatism, how European colonial powers drew political boundaries without regards to the territories of indigenous, ethnic, or tribal groups. How many independent countries function as nation states because political power rests in the hands of the dominant nationalistic culture, while sizable ethnic minority groups reside as second-class citizens. Globalization, it's important to note here, has encouraged minority populations to appeal their rights of autonomy and self-determination to the global community, gaining more clout on the world stage. Occasionally, successful secessions do occur, resulting in the birth of new nation states. Here we see the example of Kurdistan straddling the Syrian, Turkey, Iraq, Iran, even a little bit into Armenia, and how this mountainous homeland of the Kurds is now divided amongst these countries. Kurds numbering 25 million have lived here for millennia, but now are greatly split up. Large part of this due to World War I, post-World War I borders, but also Western colonial influence. Nature-culture theme, we can look at the concept, the lens, and the whole field that exists now within a lot of social science, even into the physical science of political ecology. It's a approach to understanding changes in land use, property rights, and changes in environmental conditions based on how political and economic forces affect people's relationship to the land. And often the focus is on the proximate or the immediate cause. Meaning that different scales of explanation, different layers spanning out from the immediate on-the-ground land use change, how different state national, international policies, regional, national, international policies can be affecting land use change, particularly the way in national land laws, natural resource policies, and tax codes, credit policies influence land use decision making. This has a very large effect on environmental pollution, environmental degradation, environmental change in general across the globe today. Along these lines, geopolitics we can understand as the influence of terrain on political entities, such as France's borders, not just the ocean to the west and north, but the mountains to the south and east. But more aptly here, we can understand geopolitics as the ways in which political goals and ideologies influence the ordering of the world. Prime example is Manifest Destiny in the 19th century of the US, and also the modern day oil industry's power globally. This maps out influencing many different governments, consumer purchasing habits, environmental conservation blockages. Geopolitics today, one of the more important aspects of contemporary critical geopolitics, is concerned with how this influences our understanding of human-environment relations, affects how we transform the environment. And the debates must be placed in the context of the global North's political and economic domination of the global South. For instance, vis-a-vis climate change, global warming, conservation of the global biodiversity. Very important aspects of how geopolitics are playing out. Here we have Carter Camp speaking to a group of American Indians protesting the proposed tourist development near Bear Butte State Park in Black Hills near Sturgis, South Dakota. Black Hills being a very important site for the Ogallala Sioux, and the nearby Pine Ridge Indian Reservation consider the park to be sacred ground. Therefore, tourist development would be quite infringing on this. So we can wonder, what type of conflicts may arise between conservation goals and indigenous people's rights. Here, a proposed tourist development probably won't be considered a conservation goal. It's more of an economic exploitation. However, there is lots of cases where conservation goals do infringe on indigenous people's rights. Our two most famous national parks, Yellowstone and Yosemite, were on traditional indigenous people's lands, unceded. Here we also see the nuclear waste storage site, the Hanford Nuclear Reservation, which just recently, within the last couple months, there was a leak at here in early 2017, that is. And the Hanford's facility produced plutonium for nuclear weapons in the U.S. military. And now it's a toxic site. We can wonder, could modern war be waged without this pollution? Is it even necessary to begin with? Cultural landscape theme, very important to look at the imprint of the legal code. This has a large effect on cultural landscapes, whether it be in China or US, anywhere in the world. Many laws affect the cultural landscape, but among the most noticeable are those that regulate the land survey system. This also often requires that land be divided into specific geometric patterns. You can even imagine the different property blocks within Richmond, California, how small these plots are divided up. In fact, compared to some areas in China, those would be quite large housing blocks. These legal imprints can also be seen in the cultural landscape of urban areas, in comparison to the examples in the point above, the long lots and township and range. Building height limits would fall into this as well. So here you have the township and range vividly mapped out on the landscape, large square and rectangular plots. This is in Canyon County, Idaho, most likely potato farms here. Farmland reveals a landscape grid pattern. This was imposed on much of the landscape across the U.S. following the Land Ordinance of 1785. It's a legal code, very visible. And also the national iconography on the landscape. You can think of just icon. We hear that word commonly in the news, and then graphy, similar to graphy of geography, the description of these icons. Statues of national heroes, for instance, elaborate use of national colors. Here we see the Statue of Liberty and the rising sun flag of Japan. we can take questions on those down below. Thanks.